Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Filippo Gianti. I'm working at Qualcomm, and let's have a look at the year of millimeter wave in Europe and elsewhere in the world. Next slide, please. So basically, you have much more abundant spectrum when it comes to 5G. Not only you have what we will call the sub-6 5G, that many countries have already implemented in the recent 2 to 3 years. But also you have now access. Many countries are allocating spectrum on what is so-called the millimeter wave zone, which is ranging from 24 gigahertz to up to 100 gigahertz, and on the way to 6G, probably even beyond that. So the characteristics of this spectrum, it is abundant. So there are much more spectrum. There is much more spectrum, and also it's relatively what we have observed in the past. In the past, is that the governments are giving it at a much lower price. So it's a cheaper spectrum for operators to acquire. Therefore, it's good to leverage this spectrum for the use cases that we are going to talk about today. Next slide, please. So there is a growing presence of millimeter wave, as you can see on this world map. I was presenting this world map one year ago, and it was basically mainly only the US and Japan that were on the map, plus a few exceptions at the time. Now, you see there are two I would say topics of interest here. In the gray color, you see much more spectrum allocation or in progress of being allocated this year, have been popped up mainly in Europe and Latin America and some parts of Asia. Of course, the extensive commercialization is still going on in the US and in Japan, with prominent operators like the main three operators in the US and all the four operators in Japan that have commercialized extensively millimeter wave with advanced use cases. But it should be noted the interim, I would say, category that popped up really this last year in 2021, with early commercialization in an arc that you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, with Asia, I would say, developed economies like Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Australia that have launched millimeter wave after the summer. So all in all, there is a lot of experience to gain from these deployments, and now it's pretty, I would say, mature ecosystem of operators that have launched. Next slide, please. And to that extent, even beyond the people, the operators that have, and the industry players that have already commercialized, you can see we have done a press release in July last year at the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, where 40 plus companies have supported their commitments to 5G millimeter wave. Not only operators, all the key operators around the world, but as well OEM vendors and industry vendors at large. And on the right-hand side, you see also that GSMA, the GSM Association, Global Supplier Association, have launched an accelerator, millimeter wave accelerator initiative back in November, to drive the awareness of the technology and to share best practices and use cases. So you see the steering group members on the right-hand side are bringing like prominent operators from all around the world, as well as vendors. So these I would say initiatives are key, again, to show the maturity of 5G millimeter wave as a technology. Next slide. Another absolutely key aspect of any ecosystem maturity is the device ecosystem. So Qualcomm Technologies, we are already at our fourth version of our chipsets and RF front end combination and system for millimeter wave. So fourth generation of RF modem combination. But it allows a lot of device vendors to pave the way for 5G commercialization. As you can see in this slide, there is a diversity of form factors first that we can mention, like not only smartphones, but as well PCs and hotspots and CPEs, customer premises equipment for fixed wireless access. A wide diversity of form factors shows the maturity. And the second dimension in which I would consider the maturity of the ecosystem would be the diversity of brands. So you have big brands, tier one brands, as well as smaller players. So the diversity in total 33 different devices brands, 33 devices brands have launched or are in the process of commercializing millimeter wave devices. So this shows the maturity both in terms of operator launches and also in terms of device launches. Next slide, please. So now let's move to the most attractive part, I would say, of the ecosystem is what are we going to propose as an industry to the subscribers of the operators, both to the consumer and I would say more to the prosumer. The professional consumer is probably the target, quite a premium segment for the operators that can benefit fully from the high capacity offered and high throughput offered by millimeter wave as a technology. So our premise at Qualcomm is to say millimeter wave should be complementary to sub-6 deployments in the areas where it matters for these hungry subscribers and prosumers. So as an example, we have selected 5 locations that represent almost like a day in the life of those prosumers, from the home on the left-hand side to the transit hubs like a train station, commuting train or subway stations, to the offices, and an office can be a university for a student, can be an industry, a warehouse for someone else, and can be a proper office for some of us. And then when at lunch or in the evening, you go to the outdoor hot zones or to indoor shopping malls, and in the evening, maybe entertainment venues. So we took this premise that millimeter wave should be deployed where there are capacity crunch in these particular locations, and to offer like almost like a premium journey wherever the subscribers are, whether they are in congested areas, in these areas high demand traffic, or in other places where they can enjoy the sub-6, the 5G sub-6 deployments that have already happened in many places of the world. Next slide, please. So based on this premise, what we have done is I'm looking at a study that have been performed by Bell Labs Consulting, and they have studied the same type of scenarios and the same types of high density locations. And by grouping these locations, these high density locations, I will show you on the next slide in a minute, they achieve study results where you can see a superb monetization and return on investment. On the left, you can see 8% incremental annual revenue coming from new opportunities for operators, such as fixed wireless access at the home or laptops in the offices, as well as more traditional monetization potential in places like train stations, airports, stadiums, outdoor hot zones, etc. And on the right-hand side, you can see also that the business case is not just made out of revenue, but as well in terms of cost savings versus a densification that would be done with mid-band. So when you cumulate those revenue, additional incremental revenue, and the cost savings, and I will explain that in a minute, how do we reach up to 75% cost savings, then you reach an excellent ROI of more than 20%, with in all these places a 4-year payback period, except for fixed wireless access, where you have a 5-year payback period on the scenario that Bell Labs Consulting have considered. Next slide, please. So again, the idea for an operator, the recommendation would be to strategically deploy millimeter wave in these high density zones where their premium customers, their prosumers, for example, would need it the most. And of course, we took the example of a typical UK operator that would have like 30% market share, for example, where they would look for a certain number of locations in a typical country like in the UK. So you see the number of locations of each type, like the home, as we have discussed, the office, the train station, the outdoor hotspot, the indoor malls, and the stadiums. In these 6 types of locations, Bell Labs Consulting has identified those of them where there are really high density of users, and they come up with a certain number of those locations. When you deploy millimeter wave in those locations in typical country, and it would be applicable, of course, outside of the UK, but it's more the principle, the methodology of the study is to take this type of location and to apply the monetization potential that would be incrementally driven triggered by millimeter wave deployment. And this is how you reach this 8% or 300 million euro per year yearly revenue over the next 5 years. And so next slide, please. So let me dive into one example out of the 6 locations, and the same would apply so that you understand how practically, very concretely, an operator could strategically and surgically deploy millimeter wave in high density location. So I take, for example, the train station as an example, the transit hub. So really like a commuting train station, not necessarily train station for the holidays, but like a train station for the everyday location. And it can be a subway a station in other places of the world, of course. So they have taken a train station in Paris as an example, like Gare du Nord, that is representing on the top left. And they have, with a crowdsourcing company Tutela, they have identified 10 hot zones. I'm showing you 2 of them on the bottom left of the slide. So 2 of them where you see those packed number of subscribers that are doing some traffic in particular places of the Gare du Nord. They have identified those areas where millimeter wave, we could call it like a hot zone. It's wider than a hotspot, of course, but it's smaller than the whole station. So pragmatically, we would recommend millimeter wave to be deployed in these 10 hot zones or of a particular location. And this would be done with this, I would say, marketing approach of selecting those particular areas where traffic is extremely high and density of users is high. And you end up at the right-hand side. So I start with the cost per gigabyte comparison. So imagine, of course, the assumption is that you have already sub-6 deployment, like 3.5 gigahertz, for example, in the UK or in Europe or in many places of Asia, is already deployed as an umbrella, I would say, coverage. So 3.5 already exists. And what we try is to densify the deployments where it matters for those particular subscribers. And when you densify with millimeter wave, you reach the blue color of the line. So you see there is an investment at the very beginning on the first year in 2022. And then there is a little bit of additional investment with a little bit extra capacity in 2025 based on the traffic profile of the users along the next 5 years. And when I compare it with densification that would be made with a mid-band spectrum, with a 3.5 gigahertz spectrum, for example, so on below the umbrella coverage, we would need to add so many, I would say, additional cells to cope with the traffic in these 10 hot zones. So basically, the incremental investment year over year with a mid-band spectrum would be relatively flat. And when you compare both, the overall investment needed to densify with millimeter wave would be 75% cheaper than the mid-band densification investment, again, under the overall umbrella of 3.5 gigahertz. And you have to bear in mind also that so this is driven by the number of cells, by the number of base stations, small cells that you would need to deploy in this train station. And you have to bear in mind that the number of base stations would require almost equivalent energy. So we have calculated also that 75% of less cells would lead to 70% of energy consumption savings. So it's also good for the, I would say, savings in energy efficiency and of course green period of what we want to tackle with the climate change. This is mainly driven, this high number of cells is driven by the limiting factor in 3.5 of the uplink. So we will see in the next slide. Actually, why don't we go to the next slide now, please? So where I was heading to is on the left-hand side, you have the traffic generated by those subscribers at the train station. On the x-axis, you have the downlink throughput that each use cases are generating. And on the y-axis, you have the uplink throughput in megabps per each of type of use cases. We have decided not to invent, super crazy use cases that could pop up in 5 years from now. We have decided to take the existing use cases that everyone would want to do in a busy train station, such as, streaming video, doing a video call with your office laptop users, doing what they have to do in their office work, cloud gaming, social media, etc. And you see that on the y-axis, you have a lot of traffic on the uplink. So to finish my point that I was saying at the previous slide, the limiting factor is very often the uplink driven type of use cases. And this is where if you want to offer a quality of service, a consistent quality of service across your network in those high density locations, you will be very, as an operator, you will be very quickly saturated on the uplink, and that would drive you to invest either into more mid-band or into 4 times fewer millimeter wave cells. And of course, when you are driving these type of use cases with these type of cells, on the right-hand side of the slide, you achieve the return on investment that I was mentioning at the beginning. This is the example of one train station. So you multiply after with the slide that I was showing with the multiplication effect at the level of a country. So you have a net present value after 4 years of 32k euros that you would multiply by the number of train stations where you would deploy this methodology and these millimeter wave cells, with a very good return on investment that is less than 3 years, with an internal rate of return of 30%. Next slide, please. So I wanted to conclude this showcase in order for you to understand how, in order to complete the 5G puzzle, you have, as an operator, a unique opportunity to deploy 5G millimeter wave in different areas where it matters really for your subscribers. And we were looking more at the business side of things in the previous slide. This one is more like the technology side of things. It's more for the CTO side of the equation. As you can see, millimeter wave is complementary to sub-6 for extreme capacity on the top left side and multi-megabit 5G in areas where it matters. On the top right part, we have seen very briefly that fixed wireless access also can benefit from millimeter wave and bring equivalent of fiber type of throughput through the air, if we can say, to 5G connected homes. On the bottom right, we have seen also that millimeter wave can complement nicely sub-6 in a standalone mode, so with NR dual connectivity, for example, with critical infrastructure for Industry 4.0. And last but not least, at the bottom left, millimeter wave can also benefit from Open RAN type of discussion. In order to easily deploy millimeter wave with Open RAN, you would have to deploy the remote units in the radio units in the location, and put in a remote fashion the VDU and the VCU. So it's more scalable and flexible to deploy these 5G millimeter wave cells where exactly it matters, where there are a lot of location constraints in these high density locations. So in a nutshell, with a highly abundant spectrum and relatively cheap compared with other spectrum, millimeter wave has now a mature ecosystem, both on the operator side around the world and on the devices brands, as I have shown you. And from a use case perspective, it offers the possibility to serve your premium users, your premium subscribers in specific locations where it matters for them in a cost-efficient way with a superb return on investment for operators in those specific locations. So in a nutshell, as far as we are concerned, at Qualcomm, we believe that 5G millimeter wave is the best way to complete the 5G puzzle for the operators around the world. With that, I would like to thank you very much for listening, and happy to continue the discussion offline anytime. Thank you.